Again, I'm Marcia Nedland. I am a consultant. One of my projects is that I support the National Middle Neighborhoods Community Practice. And I am usually the moderator for our monthly webinar series. And we have a pretty amazing one today that I've been thinking about for a long time. It's called New Data and New Ways of Thinking About Maintaining the Housing Stock in Middle Neighborhoods. I guess just to set this up, as we did in the description for this webinar, it's always been one of the sort of core challenges and opportunities in middle neighborhoods to work on ways of keeping them relevant for the next couple of generations of residents. And that is to take a look at the housing stock and make sure it's updated not only in terms of safety and basic functionality, but also that it includes the kinds of things that today's home buyers expect to get in their first time home buying opportunity. So there's a lot of detail and thought, depending how much you're into it. And our panels today are really into it about, what kinds of different repairs people are prioritizing, the kinds of repairs that we wish they would prioritize, if those will do a better job of positioning that house for future generations and building home equity for the existing homeowner, et cetera. So we're talking about all of that stuff today. And, basically how to develop, I think for me, I think of this as how can we develop a more multifaceted approach to maintaining housing stock in middle neighborhoods. That is, by multifaceted, I mean more than the typical, we have one loan fund that does one kind of loan for one kind of borrower, the end. How do we create a sort of a culture of home improvement in neighborhoods and give people a variety of different on-ramps and different levels of commitment to that, so that we're more likely to get more done. Okay, so the Middle Neighborhoods Initiative is just a national initiative, not really that many years old, of people who are focusing on trying to get cities and nonprofits to pay attention to their middle neighborhoods. That is, the neighborhoods that are neither the most distressed in their community nor the healthiest, and to look at their long-term trends and make sure those trends are on the right track. And if not, to make some, what we think will be financially more modest investments now to sort of right their trajectory before they become the next set of either really disinvested neighborhoods, or they become gentrified into a place where there's no longer opportunities for first-time home buyers. And this is an initiative that is jointly managed by the National Community Stabilization Trust and NeighborWorks America. We have a steering committee, which one of our panelists today is on, Amber Lynch from Des Moines. I'm on the steering committee. We have about 20 assorted researchers, practitioners, and policymakers. And I think I'm going to skip over the next couple. Well, I'll do this one and then I'll skip over the next couple. So again, in middle neighborhoods, what we know about them is they tend to have been mostly constructed as single family home neighborhoods and probably were built for families with children in their initial establishment. They tend to still be well more than 50% owner occupied, but if you look at their numbers over time, you may see that that's slowly eroding. The housing stock, because it's been around for a while, is aging. It's in better condition than much more disinvested neighborhoods, but it's starting to lack the ability to compete for today's home buyers in many places because perhaps it only has one bathroom or the kitchen hasn't been updated since 1970, et cetera. So it's kind of missing those opportunities. And just, a general acknowledgement that in the last couple of years, with this crazy housing market we've had due to COVID, I don't think the dust is still settled on where we're at with values in these neighborhoods. Certainly, we have not only got a greater demand by owner occupant home buyers for homes in these neighborhoods than we had before, but we have a lot of competition from investors that we didn't have before. And it's not clear who's winning in that competition and what it's going to mean in the long term for neighborhoods yet. So go ahead, Anne. Let's skip that one and skip that one. I sort of summarized those. If you're curious about where the middle neighborhoods are in your community, we do have a mapping tool at our website, middleneighborhoods.org, and you can type in your metropolitan statistical area, and there's a number of different toggles you can do down there on the left side of the screen to screen census tracts by different income categories to kind of start to get a feel for, just by income only, where some of your middle neighborhoods might be. It can be a good starting point for a conversation about this. And certainly a lot of other factors come into deciding what your middle neighborhoods actually are and which ones you may want to prioritize. So today we have these terrific panelists. So first we have Sophia Wedin. She's a research analyst at the Joint Center for Housing Studies at Harvard. And her writing on the topic of home repairs and home improvements, which she does as part of the Remodeling Futures program at the Joint Center, is really what gave me a focus for how to pull this topic together. I am embarrassed to admit that I never even knew there was an American Housing Survey. And apparently Sophia and her colleagues analyzed the data in that American Housing Survey, which is another product by the Census Bureau, right, Sophia? You can, yeah, nod, more or less.
HUD and Census.
HUD, okay. And so she's just some really interesting new insights into a little more detail on what people are spending their money on. And she's going to talk to us about what the picture is. What do people spend their money on in terms of home improvement or home repair? How does that vary by income groups? What the landscape is. And then we have two amazing practitioners. Paul Stewart is the director for the Oswego Renaissance Association in Oswego, New York. And he has, compared to Amber, our second practitioner, a very modest budget to work with. But he has been able to use it with very creative thinking about rehab strategies to have truly transformative effects on neighborhoods. And he's very thoughtful, both he and Amber, about using rehab as a strategy to build confidence in neighborhoods, in addition to just getting the housing stock in better shape, and to sort of leverage those improvements to also build community engagement and all kinds of other things. So Paul is our first speaker, and then Amber is executive director at Invest DSM, which is a relatively new nonprofit established by the city of Des Moines, Iowa, to invest in their middle neighborhoods and try and, my summary of it is to sort of change the trajectory of where those neighborhoods were headed so that the long-term health of the city and the city's budget too are maintained into the future. So let's get started with Sophia.
Terrific. Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully everybody can see that. I guess let me know if you can't. Yeah, thank you for that introduction. My name is Sophia Wedin, and I'm a researcher at the Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies. I want to thank the Middle Neighborhoods Initiative for putting this panel together, and also say thanks to everyone who's joining us. So today I'm going to share findings from some recent research my colleagues and I have been doing on home remodeling activity. This work uses data from the American Housing Survey to provide a quantitative look at the types of investments homeowners are making in their homes and how household income shapes their remodeling activity. This research is at the household level, not the neighborhood level, but I think and I hope that understanding remodeling activity of individual homeowners can be generalized and hopefully tell us something about what it might take to improve and revitalize housing in a neighborhood. And I'll start by sharing some key findings, key takeaways from this work. The first point that I want to highlight is that home remodeling activity includes many different types of projects, and it serves many important needs. These projects include everything from routine maintenance and repairs to replacements to discretionary improvements, and I'll talk later about how we segment those different types of remodeling activity. But collectively, these projects can prevent homes from falling into disrepair. They help keep the housing stock in good condition, and they help occupants maintain a safe and comfortable and healthy place to live. Home improvements are also an important mechanism for homeowners to build wealth by doing projects that increase the value of their homes. Yet, there are really large disparities in the amount of investment that homeowners are able to make. High-income homeowners spend much more per household than homeowners with lower incomes do. And the types of projects that homeowners invest in also reflect these differences in incomes and resources. Given the high cost of home improvements, many homeowners report spending little or nothing on home improvements and maintenance. And when lower income homeowners do invest in home remodeling projects, these projects tend to represent a large financial burden. So even though lower income homeowners spend less overall, what they do spend consumes a higher share of their incomes. So the data that I'll be presenting today, as Marcia mentioned, comes from the American Housing Survey. The AHS is a nationally representative statistical survey. It's sponsored by HUD and conducted by the US Census Bureau. It's the largest housing survey in the country, and data for the survey is collected every 2 years using the same sample of housing units. The AHS includes questions about when a house was built, the physical characteristics of the structure, the mortgage amount, and so on. And it also includes demographic information about the households who occupy these units, such as ages, race and ethnicity, household composition, and household income. And the AHS also collects detailed questions for homeowners about home remodeling and repair activity. This includes information about the types of home improvement projects that homeowners have done, how much homeowners are spending on these projects, the type of installation, whether it was a DIY or a professional project, as well as other information about home improvement activity and project financing. So to provide some context on this industry, the home improvement market has grown pretty substantially in the past decade. This chart shows our estimates of annual home improvement spending or annual homeowner spending on home improvements using data from the last 10 American housing surveys, or for the last 10 years of American housing surveys. In 2019, total homeowner spending on home improvements reached $262 billion, and homeowner spending on maintenance and repairs reached $65 billion. This brought the combined spending on the owner-occupied stock to just over $327 billion in 2019. Spending has increased in part due to gains in home prices and home equity, as well as the aging of the housing stock. Now, that $327 billion of total home improvement spending can be classified into several broad categories, which is what we're seeing on this table. So those 4 categories are discretionary, replacement, outside property, and disaster repairs. Discretionary projects, that top category, account for $77 billion of home remodeling spending in 2019. These projects include kitchen and bath remodels, room additions, and outside attachments. Outside attachments are any outdoor improvement that's physically attached to the house. So this would include things like decks, patios, garages, carports. The second broad category of home improvements is replacement projects, which accounted for $120 billion in remodeling spending in 2019. This includes exterior replacements like roofing, siding, windows, and doors, as well as interior replacements like insulation, flooring, and other replacements inside the home, and replacements to systems and equipment like HVAC, water pipes, plumbing, electrical systems, other upgrades. Outside property improvements, which totaled nearly $39 billion in spending in 2019, include any outdoor lot and yard improvement that's not touching the house. So this would include driveways, detached garages, fencing, and recreational structures, among other projects. Projects repairing damage from natural disasters, such as a hurricane, flood, tornado, wildfire, any repair related to those, accounted for almost $26 billion of spending in 2019. And that last category highlighted in orange is home maintenance. So while improvements increase the value of homes, routine maintenance and repairs preserve the value of existing homes. So it's not counted within home improvements. It's a separate category. And homeowners, as you saw on the previous slide too, spent around $65 billion on home maintenance in 2019. So homeowner spending on remodeling projects varies, and many homeowners spend relatively little to nothing to maintain or improve their homes in a given year. In 2019, 1 in 5 homeowners did not spend anything on home improvement or maintenance. And an additional 17% of households spent just between $0 and $500. So between those first two categories, nearly 40% of homeowners were spending less than $500 a year to improve or maintain their homes in 2019. And on the other end, only about 17% of homeowners were reporting relatively large amounts of spending of $10,000 or more. So despite the importance of home maintenance and upgrades, many homeowners are making relatively small levels of investment. And a lot of that is driven by differences in household income. So this slide is showing the distribution of remodeling spending broken down by income. So these are the same spending categories that we just saw in the previous slide. And here, homeowners are grouped into 5 categories of equal size based on household income. The column on the far left shows the distribution of spending by households with income in the bottom quintile or the bottom fifth. These are households who earned less than $32,000 a year in 2019. So among these households with relatively low incomes, 30% spent $0 to improve or maintain their homes. And as we can see across this chart, the share of homeowners that are spending little or nothing diminishes as income increases. If we compare homeowners in the bottom fifth for incomes with homeowners in the top fifth, homeowners in the top fifth are half as likely to report that they didn't spend anything. And while just 9% of homeowners with income in the lowest category didn't spend $10,000 or more on home repairs and improvements, 28% of homeowners with incomes in that top category reported spending $10,000 or more. Unsurprisingly, average per owner spending increases along with income. In 2019, homeowners in the US spent an average of just over $4,100 on home improvement projects and maintenance. And this number includes homeowners who did not report any project spending. And homeowners with incomes in the bottom quintile spent around half that amount at $2,300 per household. And homeowners in the highest income quintile spent an average of $7,600, which is almost double the average for all homeowners. And it's more than 3 times the average for the lowest income homeowners. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about project composition and what it is that homeowners are actually spending their money on. So on average, homeowners spend the most money on replacement projects. In 2019, homeowners spent an average of around $1,500 on replacements. And once again, this chart is including homeowners who didn't report any project spending. Spending per owner on discretionary projects was a bit less than that at $970. And homeowners on average spent around $820 on maintenance, just under $500 on outside property improvements, and around $320 per household on disaster repairs. However, when spending on these large home improvement categories is broken down by income, we see yet again that there are very large persistent disparities in spending per household. So this chart is showing the same project categories from the previous slide, segmented by income. Home improvement and maintenance spending climbs as income increases. So per household, lower income households spent less on all types of home remodeling projects when compared to higher income homeowners. So they spent less on replacement projects, less on discretionary, less on maintenance, less on outside property and disaster repairs. And if we look at this distribution by income, there's a really dramatic escalation in spending at the high end of the income spectrum. So where homeowners with incomes in the top quintile really break away from other households. They're spending much more per household on replacement projects and also on discretionary projects. And household income also shapes the composition of homeowners' remodeling spending. So the pie chart on the left here is showing the remodeling budgets of homeowners with the lowest incomes in 2019. And the pie chart on the right shows the budget for homeowners with the highest incomes. In 2019, lower income homeowners were spending a quarter of their remodeling and repair budgets on basic home maintenance. This was well above the 16% share for homeowners in the highest quintile. Lower income households also spent relatively more of their budgets on replacements, such as roofing, siding, insulation, and HVAC systems at around 39% versus around 34%. Homeowners with low incomes also spent twice as much of their remodeling budgets on disaster repairs as the higher income households did, at 12% versus 6%. So combining those three categories, lower income homeowners spent roughly 3/4 of their remodeling budgets on maintenance, replacing structures and equipment, and repairing damage from natural disasters. Lower income households also spent around half as much of their budget on discretionary improvements, such as kitchen and bath improvements. And these differences in home remodeling budgets really highlight some of the constraints that households with lower income face when they're trying to improve, maintain, repair things around their home. Because these households have fewer financial resources available to them, the types of projects they prioritize tend to be less avoidable projects. So they're spending most of their budgets on replacement and repairs. These types of projects are often necessary for basic habitability. Remodeling projects and repair projects are typically expensive and they consume a high portion of homeowners' incomes. Nationally, homeowners spent an average of 9.6% of their incomes on home improvements and maintenance in 2019. And this includes all homeowners, including homeowners who did not undertake any type of home improvement or maintenance project. And on average, the highest income homeowners spent just 5.8% of their incomes on home improvements in 2019. But the lowest income homeowners spent more than 3 times that amount, with an average of 18.3% of their incomes going toward home improvements and maintenance.
Sophia, someone asked if we would just clarify that when you say homeowners, you mean owner occupants, not landlords.
Yes, yeah, this is all only, that's a good point of clarification. This is all the owner occupied stock only refers to homeowners, not landlords. We don't have, the American Housing Survey doesn't have data about spending activity for the rental occupied stock. So so high income homeowners spending just 5.8% of their incomes on home improvement projects in 2019. Lowest income homeowners are spending 18.3% of their incomes on these projects. So even though homeowners with lower incomes are spending much less per household on all those types of home improvement projects, what they do spend is consuming a much higher share of their incomes. So to summarize, this data really points to the fact that household financial constraints shape the way households are able to spend their remodeling dollars. As income diminishes, remodeling project composition shifts toward essential and unavoidable projects and away from discretionary upgrades. And given that many replacement and repair projects are something homeowners need to do as opposed to want to do, many homeowners are spending large shares of what they have in order to maintain and improve their living spaces. And these disparities in home remodeling spending may also create and perpetuate existing disparities in living conditions. Because homes that are older or in less adequate condition tend to be less expensive, more affordable, the types of homes that lower income households can afford to purchase, by definition, may come with even more repair needs at the time of sale than the homes that are available to higher income households. And because these households buying these homes have lower incomes, they're less able to spend on improvements and maintenance that their home might have an outsized need for. So in order to improve housing conditions, especially for homeowners who can't afford to do these repairs themselves, public and nonprofit investments can help fill this critical need. There are several state and federal and municipal home repair programs that subsidize home repairs in one way or another, a few of which I've listed on this slide below. Removing financial barriers helps homeowners maintain a living space that's safe and suitable and allows them to build wealth. So I'm going to just conclude by saying that this research is ongoing. On the Joint Center for Housing Studies website, you can find our most recent report on improving America's housing, which is a biennial report about home improvement activity that covers some of the data and topics that I've shared today. Along with this report and others on the Joint Center website, you can also find supplementary data tables and interactives. And we also have a blog called Housing Perspectives, which contains shorter discussions related to this data and trends, as well as others related to housing. So with that, I'll say thank you and pass it back over to Marcia. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Sophia. I definitely recommend you follow that Housing Perspectives blog. That's how I learned about Sophia and her work. It's very interesting. So we're going to have Paul talk to us a little bit about what they do with rehab, beautification, home improvement strategies, and what kinds of things they accomplish with those. You know, I do want to point out that there's going to be a little shift here. You know, Sophia, because of the data that's available to her, was only able to differentiate what people do according to their income. But most practitioners of rehab know that even if you have the funds to do rehab, there are a lot of other factors that may influence whether or not you're willing to spend it on rehab. And I think that Paul will and Amber will talk some about the other obstacles to getting people to do improvements in how they work with those. So take it away, Paul.
Okay, sure. Thank you. Let me give you a moment. And Sophie, is that visible?
It's visible. I just think you need to click the presentation button to get it to
Go the screen. Yeah. Okay. Give me a moment. Okay, is that better?
Yep, there you go. Perfect.
Thank you. Okay. So like Marcia said, I'm going to sort of springboard off of Sophia's presentation and more about sort of, what is it about neighborhoods that rationalizes investments? And so I'm going to talk about things from a somewhat different angle, but hopefully you can sort of see the same themes at play. So I run a nonprofit organization called the Oswego Renaissance Association. It's in Oswego, New York, which is about 40 miles north of Syracuse, New York on Lake Ontario. We've been doing this for about 10 years. And we are an organization revolving around revitalizing disinvested neighborhoods. And so I'm going to kind of go through a kind of a narrative and then talk about how we do this and how it has, I think, a really profound impact, the strategy on middle neighborhoods. So if you think of neighborhoods in communities like ours, Oswego is a town of about 18,000 people. We have different types of neighborhoods. This would be a typical this is a strong neighborhood like this. You might think has higher incomes, although this is actually closer to the middle, but it's a strong neighborhood. We also have neighborhoods that you might think of as the ones that are in between. This is neither the strongest neighborhood you've seen, nor does it seem to be very distressed. It's sort of like a typical neighborhood that you might go by and not see anything remarkable about, but at closer inspection, you might see small signs of disinvestment like this house at the left. But we typically don't think of these neighborhoods as problematic. You also have really distressed neighborhoods. This one is in Oswego, New York. In fact, this one I took about 9 years ago was literally on the opposite side of the block as that one. They are literally back to back. And the trouble has been in a lot of upstate New York cities, a lot of Rust Belt cities, is that over time, more neighborhoods have declined than have been getting better. And this is becoming a real problem for communities. And historically, and there's a whole range of things that I could talk about, but I'm going to give you just the very simple bullet points in the 10 minutes that I have. Historically, the approaches to improving these neighborhoods involve traditional community development, which involves building market affordability, investing in these distressed areas and assist residents as recipients of aid, and using public subsidy. And while that is important for meeting wage and housing gaps and low income housing issues, what we find is that in Oswego, New York, we've been doing this kind of strategy for 40 years, and yet more of these kept growing. And it just seemed like we weren't getting any traction. And so in Oswego, New York, we're trying a very different approach. And in the city of Oswego, I argue that the problem to solve is actually not affordable housing. It's a lack of demand. And I want to be clear what I mean by that. It's not that Oswego does not have affordable housing needs. It's that's a need that's there. But when you have a city that has been, say, for the better part of 30, 40 years in a deindustrializing area, declining year over year, there's something else than housing affordability going on. And we argue that it is a lack of demand for moving into Oswego neighborhoods. And basically that our community had been hemorrhaging residents, people leaving, fewer people staying, fewer people moving in. And how to turn that around. Now, I'm going to use a quote that Charles Bukey gave me, which I thought was really prophetic. And he said, Paul, confidence is the currency that all neighborhoods trade on. And the issue in Oswego, New York is that the neighborhoods that we have could be strong, but the trouble is that the people that live in our communities haven't had confidence that it's made sense to make investments in their homes or investments in their blocks. And why is that? Many reasons, but precisely when you have many neighborhoods like this that are spreading, if you live across the street from that or nearby, you start to lose confidence that it makes sense to invest because you're worried the whole neighborhood's going to tell. Okay, so we decided to take a very, very different approach that made the following assumption. We believe, number one, that the neighbors in Oswego, New York, and we are a blue collar town, but that they have the resources to invest in their homes and make their blocks better, but they don't necessarily have the confidence that it makes sense to do that. So we want to change conditions so it makes sense for people to invest and renew their neighborhoods. And how do we do that? There's a couple ways, a couple things. First of all, this is a market map of our city back in 2013. The short version of it is the red areas are most distressed and the green areas are really healthy and the yellow areas are in between. There are so-called middle neighborhoods. Most of the time, traditional community development focuses on those red areas, the most distressed, where you have the greatest needs, usually with too few dollars. And in our city, no matter what we've done, those areas continue to decline decade over decade. What we argue is we are going to go after the neighborhoods that are overlooked in most community development strategies, which is the transitional or middle areas, the yellows. Yellow areas are blocks that are neither perfect nor most distressed. They're in between. They typically have your salt of the earth working families in there, people that are working at our local factory or whatever our employers are, but they're losing confidence because they see blight headed their way and disorder headed their way. Now, we partner with them typically on these blocks that have not yet tipped. We can turn them around at a fraction of the cost that it would take if we waited till after that they had tipped. And so the approach we use at first is geographic, we focus on 4 or 5 selected middle market areas where you still have some strength, but you have some risk. That's where we typically start, not the typical places that community development will go. The second thing that we do is we leverage the confidence of the neighbors that are there to begin as a whole group of people to begin reinvesting in their block. And how do we do that? So back up a bit. I'm going to skip that part. Let me get right to where we're headed, okay? So what we typically do is these are our 4 major areas in our community. And we find ways to organize neighbors who live in this area to reinvest. And there's a lot of things we do, a lot of different things we do, but I want to talk about like one thing that I think captures the spirit of our middle market approach. We recruit blocks like this middle market block, and we tell neighbors that we will match them dollar for every exterior improvement that they make, as long as it's visible from the street, up to $1,000 per household out of our pocket. So they need to invest at least $2,000 to get $1,000 back for us because it's a 1-to-1 match. So we max out at $1,000 out of our pocket, but we'll do it for every single house. But the rule is that they have to get a minimum of 5 households on their block forming a cluster. And because these grants are typically competitive, many more people apply than we have funds for. Competitive blocks typically have 10, 15 houses on their block where they apply as a group and they get funded. They're part of our Renaissance block group where they commit themselves to investing in their block. The cool thing that happens in this moment, I think it's critical, is that when you get neighbors together on a block like this, that have for years been ignored and for years have seen things going downhill around them, they get to talk about the future of their neighborhoods. I meet with every one of them every year. We talk about where do you want your neighborhood to be in 5 years, in 10 years, and they realize that they all want the same things. They want to have a better block. They want to have a stronger block that's not only more beautiful, but a safe place to raise their kids and has a stronger level of community. And once they realize they all want the same kind of thing, and not only that, that they're all on the edge of committing to reinvesting as a block, their confidence that it makes sense to invest now goes way up because they see now a potential for a future where in the past it had always just been decline. Now they can see a way they can control the trajectory of their block. So we do this with about 15 to 25 blocks a year. We partner with them on an annual basis. We do different things. We work with blocks for years. And I want to talk about how this has actually played out. So we started in 2013, I think it was 2014, we first started our Renaissance Block Challenge. We started with about 12 or so blocks in 2014. We keep working with them year over year, but the next year we expanded to more blocks in 2015, 2016, 2017. We're growing and expanding, 2018, 19, 2020, 2021, 2022. We have a lot of velocity in the city of Oswego. And what's happening is when we involve these blocks, we might give out, say, 150,000 to 200,000 in grants. Our annual budget's only about 200,000 a year. But typically the homeowners, when everyone else is investing collectively, they'll invest 3 to 4 times that amount. So we leverage about 1/2 to 3/4 of a million every year in investing in these blocks. And not only do the blocks get better physically, but the neighbors feel more confident about living there and start to gel together socially, although that's another conversation, although a critical one. So I want to share with you sort of the fun part that shows some of the before and afters that we do. And then I want to talk about how I think we're really moving the needle in a community like this. Okay. Here's an example of a Renaissance block house. This on the left, I used to think this little old lady lived there who was just reclusive. No, she was just like me. Tanya Miller, a neighbor that lives 2 blocks from me. She realizing what was possible with all her other neighbors committed to revitalizing their block. She did this with her house on the right. That only cost us $1,000, but she spent far more than that. This is a rental property, but landlords and homeowners participate. It's an enormous change, and the tenants that live there are really excited about their new house and how things are changing. On that same block, just across the street, this particular person, Margaret Waters, she decided with her small little house to change the way it projects from the street. And on and on. There's so many cool houses. Actually, this is an old rental property. That's one of the slides from today's talk. That's it today. This used to be almost an abandoned professional office. Now a couple from Connecticut moved in because they see what's happening on these blocks. The blocks are signaling better and people are moving in. Former rental property in one of our Renaissance blocks, now owner occupied, reverse converted to this new family. Amazing things they did with that. And so I'm going to go through this just kind of cool. We used to call this the Cyclops house. This is another Renaissance block. This is right on the edge where things start to get really bad. But with all the block improving around year over year, it's rationalized that kind of investment by a family because now the block makes sense to invest in because the block has a future. It's getting better. So we are unlocking private, like sort of sideline capital that the residents always had, but they didn't have the confidence to do it. Now the confidence equation is changing. And so many of these things, I'm going to run out of time, so I just want to show you these cool blocks. Sorry, I'm going to move quickly here. Low-income family like this, you might ask what they do. They've done farther than anyone. What an amazing job they did. Across the street from them, this old retired teacher couple sees that and makes these sorts of improvements. And so I'm going to skip through a lot of these. There's so many I could share with you that are really fun, but I got to get to the end, so forgive me. Lots of cool things happening in Oswego, New York. Oh, I just can't help it. I love that one. There you go, from before to after. People's confidence to invest is really growing. So I'm going to come to the end. So let's get right through it. Now, block parties and all park improvements. I'm going to skip that. So how do we do, what's our impact? So I can talk about like outputs. These are outputs. So, we've done a lot of houses. a lot of high completion rate. We put out about almost 1.5 million in grants. We've leveraged up nearly 5 million in these focused areas. But are we moving the needle? Are we growing demand for the blocks? Are we seeing the values go up? Are we seeing people wanting to move in and then using their own time and energy and money to make a difference? We really are doing that. So in our longest running Renaissance target zone, the northwest quadrant of the city, you're looking at a Google map of that. All those green houses participates in our Renaissance Block program and our Pride Grant program. We've been working them year over year for 8 years, 9 years now. Those circles, there's about 30 of those open green circles. About 22 out of those 30 are former rentals that were very bad rentals that have now converted to owner occupancy, and families are moving in and fixing them up. We had never seen that in decades in this community. And beyond that, the values of the homes in these blocks are also rising. I don't want to get in too much into the weeds, but this was a 6-year analysis we did of market values and sales rates. The blue is in our Renaissance blocks. The green is in our non-Renaissance blocks. These blocks start out very much the same. The question is who's joined up, who's participated. And the values have risen mostly year over year. This is pre-COVID. This started in 2014 through 2019. And since COVID, it's grown dramatically. So I'm arguing that, you know, the demand for the blocks is growing, the values are growing, the blocks are getting healthier. I'm not going to go into that part of it. So let me back out. In the end, the net effect that we're having is the community is seeing that with just a small amount of partnership from our organization, if you give people in these middle markets half a reason to invest, they will. And they can turn these blocks around on their own. And as we strengthen these middle markets, we start growing from the center outwards, going to more and more neighborhoods. So we've been very successful. And now a lot of the things that Sophia had talked about, it makes more sense for people to do those things where prior it had made less sense. So this is there's much more to this. I'd be happy to answer questions later. Sorry I went too long. I guess I better turn it back over to Marcia.
No problem at all, Paul. This is really fantastic information. And, we're going to hand this off to Amber. I think we sort of had this little interchange in the chat about whether this approach could work in a different scenario where it's almost entirely rental with really in a tight housing market. And I think that would be a completely different approach. And we can talk about that later. I do think the question of how do you make sure that the lowest income homeowners in a middle neighborhood can't participate fully in the same activities that the more perhaps slightly higher income residents can do is a good question. And sometimes you need a variety of tools. Just one clarifying question for you, Paul. In the match that you provide, is it a match per homeowner on a block that has, say, 10 homeowners participating, or is it the same grant for just one grant for the whole block?
So it's a match per homeowner. So you talk about up to $1,000 per property owner, landlord or owner occupied. In terms of the income levels, we match up to 1,000. So if you have participation matters more than money because we're getting people meeting them where they are. So if you can afford to spend $50 this year on flowers, we'll start there. We'll match you at that level. So it's totally scaled to income in that regard.
That's interesting as well. So let's hand it off to Amber. And Amber, maybe you could also address that question as you go along about what you notice in terms of differences of income households within your middle neighborhoods, and what are the variety of opportunities that you think are available to them. So everybody, Amber Lynch from Des Moines, Iowa.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. Let me figure out how to get the appropriate screen here. Okay. Are you all seeing my full screen PowerPoint? Hopefully. I've got a multi-screen situation.
Looks good. You're looking good, Amber.
Okay, perfect. Okay, I'm Amber Lynch. I'm the executive director of a nonprofit organization called InvestDSM. We're in Des Moines, Iowa, and I'm going to start with just a little bit about the structure of our organization and how we came to be, just to kind of set up the context for why we're working in the way that we are. So Des Moines is, let's see, I can figure out which screen I need to click on here. There we go. Okay, so Des Moines, we have a population of about 215,000. So we're a little bit more of a mid-sized city. We're the capital city of Iowa and the county seat, and have quite a bit of education and government in our city. We have just over 50 organized neighborhoods across the city. And the city of Des Moines has a fairly lengthy history of working on neighborhood revitalization. The city's program dates back to 1989, when there was a recognition that there was a fair amount of investment happening in downtown, but neighborhoods surrounding downtown were declining. More affluent families had moved out to the suburbs, like in many places. And so there was a desire on the part of our local governments, both city and county, to kind of protect and preserve the neighborhoods in Des Moines. And that effort has continued since the late 80s. We did an evaluation of that city revitalization program in 2017. And it's really that program evaluation that kind of led us to a very different approach in the way that we're working in neighborhoods. And one of the things that came out of that program evaluation, there was a variety of data work that was done, but one of the things that I think was very compelling to our council was just how much our property values were lagging behind the rest of the metro. We're in a metro area market that is growing, and being in central Iowa and surrounded by farmland, there aren't a lot of constraints on that growth out of the suburbs. And so we're in a situation where our central city has primarily an older existing housing stock, and our suburbs continue to add a lot of new construction year over year. And so for those buyers that have choices because of their income or because of what they can spend when they're choosing a home, many of them are choosing newer homes out in the suburbs rather than staying in older homes that haven't been updated in the city proper. And these lagging values are really because we're property tax reliant here in Iowa. They were driving a pretty big structural deficit in the city's budget, and really impacting the city's ability to provide essential services to all of its residents. And so all of this kind of came together to prompt, we need to be doing things very differently. Even though we've been doing good planning work across the city in all kinds of neighborhoods, resources over the years had declined. There were a small amount of dollars that were being spread across a very large geography. And so the feeling was that we needed to reorient what we were doing in order to, as Paul has said, kind of move the needle in some of these neighborhoods. We were seeing continued decline despite efforts. So in 2019, as part of the new approach, we decided to create InvestDSM as a nonprofit organization. We're actually the third nonprofit to spin out of the city's revitalization program. We have two others that focus on kind of specific issues or specific tools within the community. But InvestDSM is the most recent one, and so we were created in summer of 2019. As Marcia mentioned, we do have a fairly generous budget that comes from local option sales tax. So Des Moines was fortunate that they were able to pass a 1 cent sales tax in the spring of 2019, right as we were kind of putting all of this together. And so our funding source is through that sales tax. We get $5 million a year from the city and $5 million a year from the county right now. With that funding, we've got a board of directors that has city council members, county supervisors, and then private sector representatives on it. We have 6 staff at our organization, and now that we're a couple of years in, we're starting to attract private dollars. But when we began the initiative, it was important enough to our local governments that they wanted to get proof of concept before we started relying on private fundraising. So then the question was, well, where is this new organization going to work? We're here for a Middle Neighborhoods webinar, and that was kind of the recommendation coming out of the program evaluation as well, was that because there were going to be resource constraints in terms of the dollars that the city could apply towards this particular revitalization strategy, the recommendation was to target that towards our middle market areas. So those neighborhoods that are on the edge between, are they going in a healthy direction? Will there be investment in those homes? Or are we starting to see deferred maintenance and disinvestment creep in? In this case, in all 4 that we ended up selecting as our starting point, we were starting to see disinvestment, deferred maintenance creep in to varying degrees. And so the question was, how do we get in front of that with kind of a preventative strategy before they become truly distressed neighborhoods within the city? It was also very important to us, again, because of resource constraints, despite the fact that $10 million a year sounds like a generous budget, it goes fast. And the estimated need across our entire city was about $800 million. And so we wanted to be very targeted in how we were spending that money so that the impact could be felt from one project to the next. Again, we're trying to boost the confidence, very similar to what Paul was talking about. And so we were really trying to scale the size of the geography to the resources that we were going to have, paying attention to the needs within each of those geographies. And our 4 neighborhoods really run the spectrum of that middle market. So our Franklin area is on the healthier end of the spectrum, where maybe 1 property per block was truly starting to look distressed. And then you get down to our Columbus Park neighborhood, probably the least healthy out of our 4, where more like 6 out of 10 properties were showing deferred maintenance and disinvestment. So it's given us the opportunity, as we've kind of built out this new toolkit, to kind of figure out which tools work better in which places and how we need to tailor and adjust things based on demographics and housing characteristics, and other conditions in each neighborhood. Our organization kind of acts as an umbrella for each of these neighborhoods in terms of coordinating an overall strategy. So there were neighborhood plans developed by the city and neighborhood stakeholders for each one of these areas. And our charge at InvestDSM is really to implement those plans. Similar to Paul's work in Oswego, we're really focused on building pride and resident leadership in the neighborhood as well. And so trying to establish relationships with all of the clients we serve and connect them together, connect them to their neighbors and to their neighborhood, so that they can kind of become champions for these neighborhoods, and cheerleaders for why they're great places to live. And then what I'll spend the most time on is we're facilitating a lot of investments directly in the real estate, and trying to work with all of the different actors that come into play within a neighborhood area. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. We also do some of our own property development, although I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that today. Really our overall goal, and this is, Paul and I kind of drink the same Kool-Aid here, is, we're operating under a healthy neighborhoods model, with our overall goal really being to influence the market. So we are trying to provide financial tools to help property owners over-improve the real estate, to work on that confidence gap or the willingness gap that Paul was talking about, and also to overcome an appraisal gap. One of the things that is common in these types of areas is that the cost to do some of the replacement and discretionary improvements to these older homes exceeds what it can appraise for. And so that appraisal is limiting the ability of the homeowner or the property owner to borrow to do the entire renovation or to do a high quality renovation. And so we're trying to come in with grant funds that close that funding gap. We do have a set of design and construction standards. So there are minimum standards that every single one of our projects needs to meet in terms of the quality and durability of materials, energy efficiency in some cases. And then we also do a fair amount of partnering to on different quality of life projects. And I think with this, we're really trying to get beyond basic maintenance. Again, we're in more middle market areas where homeowners have financial capacity. They just aren't necessarily putting those dollars into their home. And so we're really trying to incentivize them to invest the dollars in home improvement projects, not just to maintain the home, but to make sure that that home is marketable in our regional housing market over the long term. The other thing that we're trying to work on, if you kind of look at the cycle on the graphic here, is we're really trying to pull on all four of these levers to make sure that the cycle of investment is spinning in the right direction. So again, going back to that kind of pride and perception and feeling of neighbors knowing each other, and we're all investing in this place together. We're very intentional about the way we design our programs so that we're kind of working on all four of these things at the same time. Okay. And then also similar to Oswego, we really look at this as trying to solve a demand problem. We are trying to encourage people to stay in our city rather than moving out to the outskirts. We are trying to maintain these as desirable neighborhoods. And if we were to put some sort of quantitative measure on this, we're really looking at how do we make sure that home values are appreciating over time on pace with inflation, so that those owners are building equity and they have equity to borrow against when they have a repair need or some other, life event. And also so that we start to shore up the structural deficit that's going on in the city's budget, so that they can continue to provide all the services that they need to keep residents here. And so, again, how do we ensure that people in Des Moines neighborhoods feel confident investing their time, energy, and money in these places? Okay, so what you're all really interested in is the various rehab programs that we run. We are, because we do have fairly hefty budget that we can work with, we're probably running or supporting upwards of 400 projects simultaneously across our 4 neighborhoods. And again, each of those is kind of working on either the willingness gap, a small amount of money to just incentivize some investment, quick win stuff, or bigger projects where we're really trying to overcome that appraisal gap. So our Block Challenge grant is really a mirror of Oswego's work that they're doing. I borrowed heavily from Paul. He was kind enough to chat with me when we were in our very beginning stages. And so why reinvent the wheel when you can steal something that's working? And so we've seen similar success with that program and repeat clients there. And again, it's more about connecting neighbors and getting them to work together to some extent than it is about the improvements that they do. But that becomes contagious, and it does start to spread down the block. And so we've had similar success there over the last couple of years. It also serves as our entry-level program. And so we really view it as the first step to get people excited about doing improvements to their home, to get them to realize that they can, that they have the capacity to, get them over fears of working with contractors, all of that sort of thing. And then hopefully interested in moving on to the next step up with us, which is our homeowner renovation program. With this program, again, it's a grant. We share the project costs. And we will share between 20 and 50% of the project costs under homeowner renovation, just depending on the neighborhood and the size of the project. So the larger the project, the more generous we get. A lot of our single family housing across our 4 neighborhoods was built in the early 1900s. And so, not only do you have updating to do in terms of kitchens and baths and all of those things, but you have a lot of replacements of major systems, and one seems to trigger the other. So if you're wanting to do a kitchen remodel, you may also have to bring your plumbing and electrical systems up to code. Might be time to replace your roof. And we're trying to make sure that our homeowners aren't doing one without the other. We also have this issue in Des Moines, and maybe some of you do in your communities as well. We have a lot of older homes that only have 1 bathroom. And so we tend to see those flip to rental or investor owned as opposed to a new home owner. And so we're trying to get in front of that, helping people put additions on or reconfigure their floor plan so that they can add extra bedrooms and bathrooms, extra living space, that sort of thing. We do also work with developers, with commercial property owners, and with rental properties. But I would say by far the vast majority of the projects that we're doing are in that homeowner category. And so we're mainly working with existing homeowners to do improvements to their home and retain them in the neighborhoods. Our larger grants have a forgiveness period on them. And so we forgive a portion each year. It's either 5 or 7 years, depending on the size of the grant that they're receiving from us. Just a few examples of projects, they run the gamut. So we're doing everything from driveway replacements, which, do actually make a major impact on the curb appeal from the street, rebuilding a lot of front porches, exterior paint. We have a lot of detached garages, and in some cases the house will be in great shape and then the garage is falling down behind it. And so we're helping people replace those garages, which, then gets them a better resale value if their garage is not falling down. The bottom picture in the middle, the 2-story section, is actually an addition on that home. And this was a family that had outgrown their home and was looking at potentially having to move out of the neighborhood. But because of our homeowner renovation grant, they were able to reconfigure their floor plan, put on the 2-story addition, and now, say that this is going to be their forever home. And so we were able to keep a family from moving out of Des Moines by allowing them to do that addition. Let's see. I'll just wrap up there with my contact information. I'm sure we will come back around to a lot of things with grants. Let's see, Marcia, you had asked me to talk a little bit about our lower income homeowners. I think one of the things that I've noticed as I watch our 4 neighborhoods perform differently, we offer those same 5 programs across all 4 of our areas. And we have different levels of interest for sure. And the way people participate is different as well. So the block challenge is not working as well in our less healthy neighborhoods. I'd say we have 2 on the healthier end of the spectrum and then 2 that are on kind of the less healthy end. And in the 2 that are less healthy, we've had not much participation in the block challenge grant. Part of it seems to be people don't know their neighbors quite as well. And so there's been a reluctance to kind of go out door to door and drum up interest for that. We do offer to help, but we haven't had too many people take us up on that. And so we're kind of slowly building trust and slowly remaking the culture in those neighborhoods, trying to get people to think differently about how they improve their home. We are getting more interest, kind of slow, consistent interest in that homeowner renovation piece. And as we have more projects completed, the word of mouth kind of spreads. I would say the difference that I see in homeowner renovation amongst the 4 neighborhoods, and this gets a little bit into income categories as well, is under homeowner renovation in our 2 less healthy neighborhoods, people can only do so much at once. So we are allowing them to come back and use the program multiple times There is a cap on how much they can receive total from us. But we're allowing them to come back multiple times so that they can phase projects. So they might do a roof replacement with us, and then they come back 6 months later and they do a kitchen remodel. And that's one way that we have been able to allow some of our lower income households to participate, because they can't necessarily do a whole house remodel or a 2-story addition all at once, like some of our higher income clients. But that doesn't mean that they don't have the means or the desire to improve their home. And so what we're hoping is that by getting beyond some of those basic maintenance things and allowing people to come back through multiple times to get to some of the discretionary repairs, that again, it kind of positions their home with better long-term marketability. And at the point when they are ready to sell, they'll have growth in value and get a return on their investment. So that's just one of the ways that we are starting to see some differences amongst our neighborhoods.
Oh, thanks, Amber. That's really great. Let's see. I also wanted to clarify, I don't think you talked about this, that there are a number of programs at the city and nonprofits that have been around for years that are devoted almost entirely to helping income, qualified, in other words, at least 80% or below area median income, with those kinds of more typical rehab, emergency repair, et cetera, kind of programs. And it was a point of importance and pride that the city did not reduce any funding for any of those programs when they invested in this strategy. All of those programs are still going. And so do you ever find that you're able to layer any of your programs over some that other organizations do that are more about, addressing the needs of very low income people, or do you just do referrals, or how does that interaction work?
Yeah, I would say for the most part, at least right now, it's a lot of referrals. We are starting to get a little bit more overlap, or figuring out ways that we can pair funds together. The city is working on a new program that will kind of cover the costs of exterior repairs for lower income households. And so we're starting to do some test projects where, we pair InvestESM's dollars to sort of reduce the amount that the city needs to put in. We do also work with, and in fact, I think we have maybe 1 or 2 people on the call today. Neighborhood Finance Corporation is another nonprofit. They are a lender. And so someone in one of our areas can pair a grant from InvestESM with a loan from Neighborhood Finance Corporation. They offer some great access to capital that lower income households might not otherwise have. And then we also partner on some commercial development and things as well. So
Right. So I think it's one of the things to consider when you're coming up with sort of a comprehensive rehab strategy for a neighborhood is to look at the whole landscape of providers and see where you can plug in what other providers aren't plugging in, and how you can coordinate or layer. And, oftentimes it's the non-income restricted funds that are the big gap. There's never enough money to fund all of the rehab that needs to be done. We have a huge income problem in this country, so we're not solving all of that, but I think that's really interesting. And I thought it was very thoughtful how you described that the Block projects aren't quite as successful right out of the gate in the more distressed of your 4 middle neighborhoods. And I think I saw Paul sort of nodding his head about that. Do you have any similar experiences, Paul?
Oh, yeah. So, Amber, I really enjoyed what you were saying, just watching it, listening through it. I saw so many familiar stories. And the issue with, if you have blocks where the social capital is weak, it's hard to get them even to thread. Okay. So many times, you have to find ways of having them work together on other things first. I've encouraged blocks like where I've had one neighbor said, I can only get 3 houses. I said, what I want you to do, Ann, not you, Ann, wherever, but I mean, the neighbor said, you need to get to know your neighbors before they're gonna join on with you on some, crusade. So when was the last time you threw a Christmas party and invited everyone?
Yeah.
Let's talk about that now. Let's talk about this year. You guys have a little barbecue, get to know your neighbors. Down the road, you have to build that critical social capital first before you're likely to get them to gel as a team. And this
Yes.
is the thing that really just took a while for me, because our someone like me just make the housing better, make the market, but you're dealing with human beings and human ecosystems.
Yeah.
That's why I get frustrated when it's always just about houses. It's about neighborhoods and people.
Mhm. Very much so.
So Amber, I mean, you're right, that those lower, I've seen it here. I didn't break them out by the more or less successful, but exactly the same story. And sometimes it can hinge on you finding that one block leader, that one person who just happens to know everyone, and they can be the person. But yes, yeah.
Absolutely.
I think those stories are so terrific at describing what Amber called the willingness gap. So we definitely have an income gap, which was illustrated by some of Sophia's presentation. But layered onto that, a thing that isn't measured by that data is the willingness gap. And so I think both of you really illustrated that we have to tackle both things. And even when people have the resources, that doesn't mean they necessarily want to feel confident about investing them if they don't feel like the neighborhood's going in the right direction, or they don't feel a sense of camaraderie with the other neighbors on the block. It's so fascinating. I'd love to see you guys like create a little continuum image of, starting with what you talked about, Paul, just people getting to know their neighbors and start to do some team building activities before you then give them the opportunity to do the block challenge, which then might lead to them being willing to take on a bigger individual housing project if the funds are available. So that
Marcy,
is,
I'm sorry.
please.
Well, there's a thread of questions that I've seen throughout these presentations that are very common. I think this is a real pressing issue I wanted to just briefly bring up. And even when you're talking, there's this tension which I think is actually not really real. Like the question is always coming up, what about households of greatest need and serving housing needs versus, and why are landlords involved, and what's going to happen? And so I want to make a couple of points. You have different dimensions to the health of a community, right? So you have housing needs, affordable housing needs, grants for furnaces, for roofs, for rent, Section 8. All these things are part of addressing an important part of your community's needs. I think the mistake the traditional community development has made has it's been defined entirely by that. The trouble is that disinvestment and blight had been spreading despite all those efforts. And so if you want to have a truly economically diverse community, Phil, where you have people with moderate incomes or higher incomes living right along with people with lower, if you really want this diversity, you have to embrace all the diverse people that are there. So in the blocks that we work, you have low income families and higher income families, and you help them together in the same way, because you're all trying to move them towards how do we make our block a place where we want to stay and invest of ourselves in the broadest sense, our time, our energy, our money, so that our block is a better place to live writ large years down the road. And so the issue, well, why should landlords get the money? It doesn't matter.
Right.
Because if you're on a block, and I live in these communities, so I know this. Like, I live on blocks where, okay, 3 or 4 out of the 15 houses are rental properties and are pretty bad. And what are we going to do? Say, no, you can't participate. We don't want to see you make improvements. That doesn't work because all these houses are connected. So you invite the people that you might even think are the bad guys to be part of it. And you know what you find is there's always a percentage of them that have always had this silent shame. It's there. They never admit to it. And when they see the block getting better, you should see the changes that they start to make, because they don't want to be the bad guy on the block. Not everyone, but a lot of them. And so then the renters, and I was talking to a couple, this was a few years ago, he came out of his door, he goes, I just like my neighborhood so much more now. I feel good about living, and he put out little flagstones on the yard, okay? These acts are part of building value. And so we shouldn't get hung up on who's getting the money and what is our goal, right? Our goal is a healthy neighborhood and we bring everyone in. So
Yeah,
let's look
That's
at things
basically-
holistically.
it's
Yeah.
the difference between the goal of a rehab strategy being about outcomes for individuals without thinking about the block or the neighborhood,
Right.
or having outcomes for a neighborhood and how that's going to function into the future. It's a
In a
different set of
context.
outcomes.
Because for decades, most of our programs are around how do we help like individual at this specific
That's
income
right.
level. But when you have cities where they're losing entire neighborhoods sliding off the cliff, you have to think differently. You have to think broader. How do we make it so that everyday people conclude they're the ones that are going to make these strong neighborhoods? Because the government will not have the money to do all this, but the
That's right.
people have the time and energy and money collectively over time to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's right. Go
as
ahead,
somebody
Sophia.
who's primarily or really only been studying this at the household level, I think it's so valuable to hear this perspective of like reshaping housing at the neighborhood level. Because I think the answer in short to this sort of debate, which is it households or neighborhoods, is it's both, right?
Yes.
And there are lower income households that live in higher income neighborhoods. And of course, those households are going to need help subsidizing home repairs. But then, of course, there's this huge neighborhood component where, like, because of residential segregation, often because lower income households are clustered together, it's those programs, whether it's at the neighborhood level or whether it's a federal program that's helping households individually. Either way, a rising tide lifts all boats, and this is kind of like this is something where like an entire neighborhood should be involved. I think it's a very interesting perspective to hear. And it makes me think that there are so many other benefits beyond having safe and healthy living conditions, in addition to having safe and healthy living conditions, and in addition to an individual household building wealth, which is the ripple effects that it could have in an entire neighborhood, especially when a lot of the neighborhood is feeling some of that distress too.
I think
Absolutely,
the best
yeah.
thing that could ever happen, I mean this sincerely, is if some of the people that were the most influential in United States housing policy lived in the neighborhoods where these are implemented, because I do. I have all income levels. You at ground level, you learn very quickly what's going on, and you learn the limits of the traditional approaches and what you need to augment them with. And Sophia, like we've argued even with our former community development offices, we've wanted to work with them where they have these grants for low income households. We want them to coordinate with us where if they can, to prioritize those in the low income families in the blocks where we're working, right? If they can't do it everywhere, that's where we want to start. And what we do is we spread out from there. You grow out from there. It's not like you leave neighbors behind, but you got to start strategically. Where are you going to start? Because you can't work everywhere at once. You get spread so thin. You got to decide where you can work.
Mhm. Yeah, I think on that note, Paul, something else that you said that is very counterintuitive to many in the community development field is starting from where there's strength, right? Yeah. Find your blocks that are more in that average tipping towards strong condition. Start there. There's capacity there. Yeah. And then that capacity is leveraged and it starts to spread. Change like this spreads. It doesn't really scale in a traditional sense. It's going to spread from kind of one block to the next because people are seeing what's going on next door to them. We have yard signs that we put out when people do projects and we get so many calls. People just want to know how they get a yard sign. Like, right, well, you can get money too, for your home repair. So it's just, I think that building from a point of strength, rather than going to the worst first, is a little bit counterintuitive
it's where you start. I mean, if you use a World War II analogy, you don't drop your limited troop resources in the middle of where everything is hardest. You need to get a foothold somewhere.
Yeah.
And also, the other thing I would add to what you're saying, Amber, is we do sometimes, we'll get applications from blocks that are severely distressed. Sometimes we do fund them, like we try experiments, and then occasionally they will surprise the hell out of you. And so we go, once we start to see momentum, it's like planting a seed. If you start to see growth there, we follow up on it. We double down on where they're doing it. You know, we don't really care how much money they have or don't have. If they can put in time and energy, we're with them.
Yep, absolutely.
There's a question for Sophia, but I think it relates to another question that Amber might be able to shed some light on too, but the whole issue of DIY. Like on the one hand, to what extent do you allow it in your situations, Amber? But for Sophia, you know, is there any data to describe more empirically the phenomenon that we all know is true? And this person is talking about their own family, where if you're lower income, you try to fix things yourself, or you get your brother-in-law to do it, or whatever. And you know, you're in some cases not having in fact, I remember working with Amber when she was first, you know, we were sort of designing all of her organization and programs, and we had residents go out and look at properties that were listed for sale to understand what was actually out there and what kind of condition these properties were in. And one of the things the residents said over and over again is there's all this DIY stuff that really is going to be a problem to get for this house that is for sale to attract a home buyer. So the DIY thing is a big deal. So what do you think about that, Sophia? What have you learned about that?
So that's a very interesting question, because we have data about DIY activity, about all types of project activity, including whether the installation was DIY or professional. What we don't know is the motivation for these projects, and whether it's like, is this supplementing something that a homeowner is getting a professional to do? Is it in lieu of some sort of professional installation because they can't afford it? Is it just like a passion project? We don't always know. The data doesn't tell us what choices, what trade-offs the household is making when they're deciding on that type of installation. So it's not really something we can measure exactly for like homeowners doing DIY because they can't afford to do something, because they can't afford to do it as a professional installation instead. But given the patterns we see with homeowner spending, where they're more likely to spend nothing, more likely to spend very small amounts on a project, more likely to do these like what we call need to do as opposed to like want to do projects. All of that seems to sort of point to the fact that homeowners are doing what they can, and when their financial resources are limited, they're doing a lot less.
There's a story that a colleague of mine that a lot of people on this call probably know that he did when he was running a nonprofit that I think opens up another component of what we could be doing if we had an array of rehab stories. And that was that he would do pop-up home repair workshops in the neighborhood. And the way he would decide to do them is the story that we always repeat is that they've done a lot of rehab in this one particular neighborhood they were working in. And one of their staff was driving by and saw a porch, a front door, screen door that had the screen ripped. And that seems like such a little thing, but it's such a big thing when it's on the exterior, you know, and what people do or don't do about it. So they just immediately organized a screen repair workshop on the front porch of that house, invited all the neighbors around there. And so it raised the expectation of when something like this happens, you fix it. It taught people how to do it well. And it kept that property looking great. And I think there is another chunk of work we could be doing where we're teaching people to do this DIY stuff in, you know, a higher quality way. And that could help to extend the resources that people have and not have to make everything professionally done. So when you have a moment, Amber, you can start to develop a whole training program when you have a moment between your 400 projects you're managing.
You want to give me some more staff first? We we do allow DIY projects, but there are some caveats to that. And it is a little bit the bane of my staff's existence because, then we have to wade through 50 million Menards receipts on the back end to make sure that they're not charging us for pop or laundry detergent or whatever, which they often do. So we do allow DIY, but city permits have to be pulled. So if it's work that requires a permit has to be pulled so that city inspectors can go out and inspect the work and make sure that it's done properly. Someone on my staff, we have construction specialists that do go out and they inspect the work as well before we pay out our grant. So, we're making sure that we have a little bit of a quality control on that as well. And if it's something that requires a licensed trade, they have to, or even if they're installing flooring, they have to demonstrate that they have the skills required or the license required to do that type of work. So we don't want somebody doing their own electrical if they're not an electrician. They have to first kind of prove to us that they have the skills or the licensure to complete that.
Well,
makes
you're stricter than we are, Amber, right? Because like I said, Oswego's a blue collar town, and if we didn't do DIY, probably a third of the things wouldn't happen, right? So you get a lot of people painting their own houses, and there's a lot of skilled. The people are very skilled. It's just the culture here. That's number one. But number two, I would even argue to say, I would agree, Amber, we put some constraints on certain things. Like we don't, for example, not so much on how something is done, but when we do exterior only. So you're in a different party, in a different place. But we say we won't fund enclosing porches or taking off historical details like that. We have limits on that.
Yeah.
But I want to give you just an example of something. Like one time I got approached by a friend of mine because he was talking about a block in a very low income block on the east side that we were sponsoring. And he's like, Paul, you got to go there. Look at what this guy is doing. It's terrible. It's all, I can't, something has to be done. We got to call code. I'm like, what? Because he's building this deck, the stairs in front of his house. So this was a house that literally had some cinder blocks going up to the front prior. So I'm like, okay, I'll look at it. I go over there, it was a deck made out of some 2x6s that was fairly simple, and he was painting it white, and it was just a basic, unremarkable, unsophisticated deck. And I said, Mark, you got to understand, you're taking this guy from having never given a crap about what was going on. Now, this is his effort. So let's take that effort and then let's build off that. Again, it's like letting people, meeting them where they're at. It wasn't horrible. And so, yeah, we do have occasionally DIY projects that make me cringe, but we're trying to leverage a culture of investing of yourself.
Right.
And so you can't get mad at your kid when his first painting is not, Picasso. And then there was a question in the chat. I treat things like almost like we're a bank. Like we give out grants to do improvements. You find your contractor, you buy the materials, we just get receipts. The permits, that's something you guys got to solve like anybody else. So we don't even have to get entangled in that. Although I do occasionally get the phone call. They think that we're responsible, but so.
By the way, just a little technical issue. When you guys in your block improvement programs, how do you define a block? How do you define a block?
Well, most of the time, blocks are fuzzy, right? So you're talking about, and I tell when people are applying, I'll say, listen, ideally, it's a street that's bound by 2 cross streets at both ends. That's your ideal. But neighborhoods don't work that way, right? Like strictly that way. So sometimes they go around a corner. They can only get a maximum of 15 houses. But what I say to them is if you're going to cross an intersection, you can't cross it more than one, because then you get into an area where someone else needs to lead.
Organize
And the second thing is that we do tell them, though, the way we score, one of the factors is the density. So if you're a house that's applying next to another house that's applying, those houses double each other's application points. So we naturally incentivize people being tightly compact so we get compound gain.
That's really smart.
We're pretty loose about that, but so you typically will get focused applications.
Mhm. Yeah, for us, the rule is for those block challenge applications, you know, the team that applies, one project has to be able to see the next project from its front door. So improvements have to be visible from the street, and each project has to be able to see another one from somebody's front door. And
Love
so
that.
we also get wrapping the corner and down the street sometimes. But it seems to work out okay.
You know, Amber, you got to be real careful. Like one of the things I joke about, there's a phrase that came up called block leader poaching. And there's the only danger, like a lot of people, they have friends around corners and they're like, yeah, you can do this. But then every once in a while you'll get someone where there's this person 2 blocks down, can they hop on with us? And it's like, no, they can't, because they're the only person that's going to lead that block. They need to organize their own neighbors. But I've seen this attempt to poach block leaders that ends up hurting you. So it's a tension there. You got to try to keep them together, but while honoring social connections, it's like it's a balance.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
So guys, our time is up. It's such a wonderful topic. I love it. I am going to say that we're going to do a follow-up email to everyone who registered for this webinar with a link to the recording and a link to the slide decks so that some of those slides you can use. And I'm going to ask Anne to also send along a best practice she wrote up about Amber's block program, so you can have a little bit more detail there. And I think she's probably going to be writing up something on Paul's, so that may be forthcoming. I encourage you to, if you go to, for sure, Amber's website, you can look at all of the application forms and everything that she has online for these programs. So you can see some of the details about how they run them. And that's probably true for you too, Paul, right? Is the application for the block program on your website?
The instructions on how to apply are, but the actual application goes up in January.
Oh, okay. Well,
But
so
I can make it available to anybody. I mean,
that's great.
Yeah.
So everybody who's remaining, please join our community of practice, because then you'll be on a regular mailing list for the webinars that we're doing and our newsletters and all of that. Just go to middleneighborhoods.org, and at the bottom of any web page is a place where you can sign up. I'm so grateful to all of the panelists today. I could have each of you talk for several more hours and be totally entertained. I hope that, we start to influence the way people deliver assistance to people in neighborhoods around maintaining and improving and repairing their homes. And Sophia, I hope we have you back someday incorporating some of this other neighborhood thought into the individual outcomes that you're able to research. But it's really, really fun to hear what you know about this. So thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.